And 70 people across 7 different states have been sickened due to a salmonella outbreak. This one is linked to eggs. And now there is a major recall.
At least 68 people have been sickened with salmonella linked to cucumbers, 18 of which have been hospitalized and no deaths have occurred. The map up top shows
There's a deadly listeria outbreak linked to chicken fettuccine Alfredo. Hi, I'm Monty, and I track food.
If you have recently bought frozen shrimp, stop what you're doing and check your freezer. Bornstein Foods just recalled 45,000 pounds of shrimp, potentially for fatal listeria contamination.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler, and we are conducting a series of talks about the ideas of recalls. Recalls have been in the news a great deal lately. It's hard to ignore 2024, the last few months, and some of the most significant outbreaks we've had in a little while. I was just on a call recently with an investigator, and he was working on writing a report and saying, well, there's these numbers that came out from a public interest research group, PERG, study just very recently. And I'm talking about February 2025. It was released. And I said, well, if you look at it in terms of the sheer number of events, that's one thing. But if you start looking at things in terms of quantity recalled, or different types of food recalled, or the number of states impacted, or number of people harmed, hospitalized, died, there's so many different ways of looking at it to say, is it actually worse or is it getting better? And ultimately, the one thing that I ended up saying was that what I want to prevent is reactive philanthropy becoming a substitute for the more proactive and intentful ethical and legal responsibilities being taken by industry. So to talk with us today and over the next series of videos, we have Bob Manning. And Bob Manning is the author of In the Midst of a Recall, an incredible book. It's not just like a history book or anything like that. Yes, there's some case studies talked about this, but this is something I look at in terms of if you are working with the food industry or even related company that is subject to recalls and you don't know what you're talking about, this is a book that really opened my eyes. Before we get into the book, let's talk with its author, Bob Manning. Bob, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for joining. I really appreciate your willingness to spend some time with me here recording this. But for those who might not know you, tell me a little bit about, and tell our audience a little bit about, how did you get to this point of knowing enough about recalls that you want to write a book about them?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story. I mean, I've been in food and beverage manufacturing my whole career, 30 years now. And through that process, I started in dairy manufacturing, and then I went to bread and stuffing production, then went back to dairy, and then went back to, so I bounced around a little bit. And, through that process, I worked in both sides, both operations and quality. I started in quality and then got bounced back and forth. And I say, I don't think anybody wanted me on their team, but I think, someone said, well, I think everybody wanted you on their team. However you look at that, right? And so, but being on both sides of the fence, I saw how one impacted the other. And then if we fast forward to 2016, that's when my eyes were opened. And so I worked for a company that made aseptic beverages, aseptic protein beverages. It's readily available. I worked for HP Hood at the time, and we produced muscle milk. And muscle milk was a high protein beverage. It's still on the market today. And we had went through a recall, and it was a sizable recall. And through that process, when it first had hit, we thought it was something along the lines of just product spoilage. But the brand owner was concerned because they had done some preliminary tests which showed the potential for a Clostridium type organism. Of course, everybody thinks, well, it's Clostridium botulinum. But when you have consumers' lives at risk, which Clostridium botulinum can be life-threatening or life-ending, you have to make very quick decisions. And through that process, we did make a very fast decision to have a Class 1 recall. And through that process, the owner of the time, who unfortunately has since passed away, and he was a phenomenal person, he called me and he had asked me, so here's the owner of a very large company. He said, Bob, I'd like you to lead this investigation, and everybody in the company will report to you. I don't care what their title is, and you have full authority to do whatever you need to find out what happened, but more importantly, to make sure it never happens again. So that led through the recall, and then I ended up leaving the company a couple years later, and now I'm with another company. And somebody, we were working on a recall project. It was just like a recall plan. And somebody said to me, they said, no one's ever written a book on what really happens in a recall. And that's what triggered it. I thought to myself, geez, I mean, I can write that. That's, no problem. And I went home that night and I said to my wife, I said, honey, I'm going to write a book. She said, great. About what? And so I said, recalls. And so literally within 30 days, the book was written. And it was really just like a complete brain dump that led to that. But little did I know how long it takes to really write a book. So, but then as I looked at it, the question is why? And so as I was writing it, I really focused on the reactive side. So the beginning of the book is all the reactive part. But then when I thought about it, really what the premise is and where the impact lies, it's on the proactive side, the preventative and the proactive side. And as I continued to write the book, I really thought about why I'm writing the book and really what's important. And through that process, it came down to human life. And so the way that I look at it is that if this book can prevent just one recall, first and foremost, you're protecting people's lives. Secondly, when you have a recall, you have livelihoods at stake. So companies either go out of business or they downsize. So you have first and foremost people, then secondly, livelihoods. Third is around the environmental impacts. So now you're taking all of this food, and when you have a recall, everything comes back. Everything with your name comes back. And if people think, well, it's only this small run, well, that's not true, right? Everything will come back and it'll all go into a landfill. And so there's that environmental impact. The world is getting bigger, the food supply is getting smaller. So now you have less food to feed people. So if I can prevent just one recall, I can, in a sense, save somebody's life. I can save someone's livelihood. I can prevent environmental impacts. I can actually strengthen the food safety or food manufacturing process. And I, in a sense, could feed more people.
Think that people realize just how tangled of a web, you have an impact that of a recall that people think, oh, it's just going to affect this one thing. No, it's going to affect consumers. It's going to affect workers' jobs. It's going to affect the environment. It's going to impact brand reputation. It's going to impact retailers and restaurants and so many different.
Mhm.
It's like, even companies that you would think are not even related to the product, but now
Right.
they've been brought into this this mess because of
Yeah.
how complicated our distribution system is.
Right.
And but I really like, before we move on, I really like how you
Mhm.
organize the book into three, and you hinted on this a little bit, but let's be very clear before we move on. You have three very clear phases. Can you discuss what do you mean by each of those phases? We're going to go into this much more, but just
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
like, what is that headline for each of the three phases?
Yeah. So, when I look at, a lot of people will put proactivity and prevention in the same bucket. In a sense, they are. But when I look at it and had going through this process and really stepping back and saying, okay, like how does this kind of relate? It's like when I look at proactivity, it's looking out. It's looking at what are some of the things that are going to threaten our business? What are some of the things that are going to threaten our products that are not existent today? They're not even on the radar screen, but they're out there, right? They're way out there. But how do you start getting that information, that data, those trends to identify what's out there? Then, once you identify what's out there or the potential and the probability and the likelihood of all that happening, what preventative steps can you put in place within your organization? And then put those red flags up and to identify, is this becoming a real threat or is this just something pie in the sky that we don't have to worry about? But when you put those two together and you combine them, so you have the proactive side of data gathering and information, and everybody now talks about data analytics, and I think this is where it's really coming into play. And then you take the preventative side or the actions that you can put in your program or in your programs to really start to drive out that risk. And, when I look at those two components, I look at the proactive side as like the strategic component. And then I look at the preventative side as the tactical component. And so, those two really work well hand in hand, but it takes a lot of effort to do because no one what we're seeing right now is people don't really want to pay for prevention and proactivity, but they'll pay anything for reactivity, just make it go away. And so, you have the proactive and the preventative side, but then the reactive side is, how do I put this thing out? How do I put this to bed quickly with the minimum impact and the minimum issues within our organization? And so, as I mentioned, unfortunately, people don't really want to focus on the proactive and the preventative side. They'll deal with the reactive should it happen. And, today it's unfortunately, and I don't want to be a doomsday person, what I'm seeing in the marketplace is the level of knowledge and experience out there running these manufacturing plants. I think there's a high level of risk because people are running plants and they may not know all of the ins and the outs of what they're doing.
Yeah, it seems like, well, on one hand, when you really get into the after incident type investigation, you find that there were red flags, like you mentioned. There
Hmm.
were red flags that were there all along if someone had just paid attention to them.
Sure.
Um, but kind of in the reactive sense as well, you know, the media, they like a good comeback story. They don't necessarily celebrate the worker prevented a recall from having to
Right.
take place in worker prevented this. It's always like company rebounds, company
That's right.
invests in this now, company
Yeah.
vows never to let this happen again.
Yeah. And it's all the same playbook, right? It's, oh, we're going to hire a trainer and we're going to put new training and we're going to do all that. And,
It's
all
so
well.
predictable. Literally,
Exactly.
I have
It's
told audiences, listen, they're going to say we want to make sure that, our customers understand how much we prioritize food safety. We want to reinvest in our priorities. We're going to put
Mhm.
someone in charge. We're going to hire an advisory team. We're going to invest in new testing or new equipment, and we're going to retrain everyone. And
Yeah.
then
That's
a
right.
company has a problem, and then some executive officer or representative or lawyer, whatever, in front of a
Yep.
camera says those exact words, and people come back to me and go, Darin, how did you know?
That's
Because
right.
it happens every time.
That's right. Exactly. And it's unfortunate because, unfortunately, as you know, I mean, lives are at stake. And
Yeah,
people, I think, lose sight of that. They don't understand the magnitude in exactly what they're doing in the world, right? It's like, oh, I've heard people say, oh, we just make milk, or we just make cookies, or that just making. I mean, we saw a big recall in the news just this week about, or it's been going on since 2018, right? And how
yeah,
many people have passed away? And so, like, I was involved in a manufacturing plant of ice cream one time, and so it's very similar, right? You're feeding a lot of people products that, unfortunately, you have both ends of the spectrum with regard to immunocompromised. You have infants or children, and then you have seniors. And so, because everybody eats ice cream, right? And so you have all those things to deal with, but they don't realize the magnitude of what they do in and day out, that could
yeah.
hopefully you're affecting their lives in the positive, but it could just be the opposite as well.
Well, Bob, we're going to talk more about your experiences here and your thoughts on recalls, and again, looking into some of the organization and focus here in your book, In the Midst of a Recall. Thank you very much for joining me for our first episode.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.